Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. If you have been a long-time listener of the podcast, you know I am a pranayama nerd, and we have had so many conversations about pranayama and breathing on this podcast. I have also shared my very deep personal story of how my mom passed because of a lung disease, and it took me a long time to make peace with the fact that I indulge in pranayama and taking free deep breaths. But it is my mission to turn pain into purpose that we get very nerdy about pranayama and breathing on this podcast. On the show today, I have a conversation about breathing as well as the anatomy of breathing. My guest today is Michelle Edmison. She is a registered physiotherapist at a clinic in Vancouver, Canada. She has been an instructor in the Faculty of Medicine at the University of British Columbia for over 15 years and has been a movement educator teaching classes online and group classes and been in conversation with yoga teachers and other professionals for over 2 decades. Michelle blends her clinical experience and research and several specializations into what she teaches today. Her goal is to optimize movement and physical longevity. And I came across Michelle on an Instagram reel, and she was talking about breathing, and she had the lungs as a prop, and that's when it caught my attention. On the show today, Michelle and I deconstruct breathing. She answers a lot of questions that come up very often in the yoga circles. So I would highly encourage you to dive deep into this conversation about breathing and anatomy. She also gives you some walkaway practices that you can take with you into your classes. I know most of you listen to this podcast as a non-visual audio podcast, but I would recommend that for this episode, you check out the YouTube version if you can. Michelle does have her ribcage model, and she also explains a specific breathwork technique, which a visual medium will just make it so much easier. So listen to the episode as you usually do, but also click on the YouTube links for it so you can get the visuals as needed. I have linked to everything about Michelle in the show notes as well as the podcast description. If you enjoyed today's conversation, do remember to leave us a rating and a review, as that helps take this podcast to other yoga nerds out there. Here's Michelle, and I will see you on the other side. Hi, Michelle. Welcome to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast.
Thank you for having me. Good to see you this morning.
I have been following you for so long, and I can't believe it's taken me this long to actually bring you onto this podcast. So the reason I ended up following you was because you were on Instagram one day with the diaphragm and trying to do something and explain. I don't remember exactly what it was, but that's what caught my attention because I am a pranayama nerd and I work with a lot of breathing. And to me, that is one of the central components of what I do. So that's when I connected with you online and I made a mental note. I was like, okay, I got to get Michelle on the show sometime. And here we are talking about the body and breathing. So
yay!
To kick things off, when I was thinking about us talking today, there are so many angles that we could approach this. It is such a vast topic. So to add a little bit of structure in my own naive way, I have decided to start at the nose and the mouth and then go all the way down. Okay. So to give it a little bit of direction. So to start things off, can we talk about the difference or the importance of nose breathing versus mouth breathing? Because I grew up in India. I was born and raised in India. I've lived in Seattle for the past 13 something years. And one of the most striking things to me, Michelle, was when I was in yoga classes here, there was a lot of exhale through the mouth, exhale through the mouth. And I was literally raised saying, close your mouth, breathe through your nose. And so what are the pros and cons? Are there specific moments where you suggest one over the other?
Oh, this is such a great place to start because I do think, and I think all of the research would support this, is that nasal breathing versus mouth breathing is probably the single most profound thing you can do to influence your health and well-being. It is so powerful. Breathing affects every single system, every single cell in your body. And understanding it, because you can use it as a tool. There is optimal breathing, and then there are these variations and strategies that are tools to get a specific effect. And it's just this wonderful, pathway that you can go down. So for pure clarity, we were designed, naturally selected to breathe through our nose. That is the way it was meant to be. And the details behind that. So number one, it is better air. So we probably all know it is warmed, humidified, and filtered when you breathe in through your nose. The other really important thing that many people don't know is that your nasal passages and sinuses are lined with nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is what helps release oxygen to your brain, to your muscles, to your organs. You don't get any of that if you're breathing in through your mouth. Number two is the biomechanics part of it, internal pressures. And this is my favorite part of core and breathing, are kind of my passion, I would say. But managing internal pressures, managing airflow is really, really important. And you can feel this if you breathe in through your mouth versus in through your nose. One of the first things is you do not get very much rib cage expansion. You just don't. So you're going to get a stiffer rib cage. You also are going to have a very, very hard time creating intra-abdominal pressure. So I'm not sure if your listeners would know this, but generally, stability core is about integrating muscles to create this pressure system and intra-abdominal pressure, which is what supports you. And that's from the inside out. And it should be 360 degrees around, so all the way around. And you can feel it. It is very hard to get intra-abdominal pressure when you breathe in through your nose or mouth versus if you breathe in through your nose. You can usually get that expansion in the back and the kidney area that is so often compressed on people. So you're just naturally going to have all of those effects. And then there's your nervous system. 100%, it is more of a sympathetic tool, breathing in through your mouth, versus parasympathetic if you're breathing in through your nose, and we can go into the reasons why. And then there's all of the oral health, oral facial aesthetics that we see, that if you're not using your sinuses, you're going to see the sinuses get smaller. You'll start to see the chin recede. You see puffiness under the eyes. You see teeth crowding. The dental arch rises up instead of coming down and keeping things, getting that nice wide jaw. So 100% at rest, most of the time, you want to be breathing in through your nose. And so then you actually did highlight the breathing out. Should it be through the nose or the mouth? From all of my studies on, again, internal pressure management, airflow, breathing out through the mouth is still more optimal for maintaining those pressures. But there are a lot of reasons why we would use breathing out through the nose is more optimal. But times where we would use the breath out in certain ways to get an effect on the nervous system or the biomechanics. So nose breathing, everybody should be making an effort to have most of the breaths in and out through the nose.
Understood. So I know you do, core is one of your main things, and I want to get to that in a moment. But if we went further down from the nose, right? Then we also have nowadays the rolled shoulders and the spine dropped and the chest dropped. We have a lot of tension built around the neck and shoulders, right? So I know that influences your breathing. I know it impacts your breathing. But is there a nuance there that we are missing before we go further down into the trunk?
So I would say this is probably one of the most disruptive areas for tightness in the whole breathing and core system. So this battle that I know all of you out there constantly trying to cue your patients, clients to have better control of like what this rib cage looks like. Are you in this flared position or are you hunched over? Generally, what happens is, as you said, shoulders kind of close in, maybe head comes forward, and we get this tightness across the front. And what it tends to do is it puts us into this ribs raised up, kind of stuck in an inspiratory position, we would say. So it's kind of, you're stuck like this. We're not getting that full
I see that.
exhale. So what happens is you have this short front of the rib cage, basically, and your option is to stand up tall, get your shoulders back, but your ribs flare, or you get the ribs down, but your head is forward and you feel just, this doesn't feel good. Your shoulders are forwards. So you have this tug of war where you can't get your head back, shoulders wide, and still get the ribs down. So if we don't do something to release this, and this is one of the things that I think everybody should be doing something about every day, you are going to have to fight yourself so much to get the ribs down, to get the head back, the shoulders back. And the reason that is so important is that our diaphragm, that beautiful dome-shaped muscle, and there's two hemidiaphragms that are slightly different, but think of it as a big dome through here. It is domed when the ribs come down. So it should be anchored down by your abdominals and some other muscles like serratus anterior. And then the diaphragm can descend. That central tendon of the diaphragm can descend with a breath in. But if it's not domed, what we often see is the diaphragm is flat. It's more hypertonic. It doesn't have that nice dome shape to it. Then you can't breathe. Your diaphragm needs to go into that position, the resting position of being in a dome shape. So this is a big deal, tightness up here. And often the fastest way I create change in people with breathing and core is not going after breathing and core. It's release this, give your body a little bit of a blank canvas so that you don't have to fight yourself so much. You don't have to create that abdominal gripping, that effort, because abdominals were not really designed to have to work that hard to fight against all of the tightness up here. And then it's just a more sophisticated, strategic way of getting comfortable core and breathing experience.
So how would you release that? Would it be front body length? Would it be the spine? Because I was thinking the spine will influence the rib cage considerably. Is it side body lengthening? How would we approach this?
So it's good to be really specific because our rib cage, generally, we want it to be able to expand 360 degrees and compress 360 degrees. You need that variability, yin yang, both sympathetic, parasympathetic. And you want to know where you are restricted. So this is an area that I would say is a specific area. We want to bring this down. So again, stuck in a bit of a inspiratory position from those short, shallow chest breaths. We're not using our diaphragm. We're using our accessory muscles to breathe. You want to do something to release these. So, my go-to that I have everybody doing is getting your hands on like sticky skin, pulling down, and then grow, have that nice elongation of your spine. But even just then going into neck extension, no pinching allowed in the neck. Make sure there's nothing there. And then just take 5 breath cycles. So a very easy breath in through the nose, tongue on the roof of your mouth. And then the breath out, use your hands and just assist a little bit to pull down. So, and again, preferable to breathe out through the nose, but you could breathe out through your mouth. And then repeat. Now that's one spot. And then 100%, you also want maybe go into a little bit of side bending, a little bit of rotation, and then get these, your scalene, sternocleidomastoid, all of these accessory muscles. And again, 3 to 5 breath cycles, easy, quiet, slow breath in through the nose, tongue on the roof of your mouth, and then that breath out. And you could breathe out. So sometimes the reason we breathe out through the mouth, this might be a good time to talk about it, is you can purse your lips, you create more resistance, and then that can facilitate more abdominal activation to try to bring those ribs down, because it generally is the abdominals that have to anchor those ribs down so that we get the domed position. And that one feels so good.
I was just trying it.
Yeah.
And usually I have a lot of range and I don't feel it. But then when I did this, I was like, whoa, there's so much tightness there.
And if you don't feel tightness, good for you. That is fantastic. Yeah. But I don't think anyone doesn't have tightness there. This modern world that we're all trying to reconcile, what it is that's creating these uncomfortable bodies and chronic tension, it's not going away anytime soon. So you need to carve out a little bit of time to hit the big players. And this, I think, I'm so glad you brought it up, is doing a little bit of a release here is going to make your yoga practice, going to CrossFit, whatever you're doing, such better quality movement. You won't have to fight yourself so much. So that is really important. But then if I was going to say number 2, 100%, everyone has that back body extension compression strategy, these sausages that compress your back, that go all the way down to pelvis. And that back body expansion is so gorgeous. And it's very hard to get. So we have, specific techniques. I mean, I love child's pose and just something underneath your ribs, so that we call that positional breathing, where we put you in a position, maybe add some props, and then without you even thinking about it, the airflow is going to go where you want it to go. It's not going to go in your belly. Your abdominals don't have to work hard because that prop is blocking it. So it's very little effort, and it just creates this, again, internal pressure management, airflow, so you don't have to fight yourself so much. So back body is important. Side body is important. Often people are in patterns. They'll be a little bit more stuck, compressed on one side versus the other. So go after your patterns. And lateral expansion. So we want all of it, 360 degrees. And that's where it gets a little overwhelming. But yoga is a fantastic way to get into these positions that you don't get into in life, and then just breathe. And that's positional breathing.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating, because even in yoga, right, one of the things we go after is a lot of side body opening, lengthening, and back body expansion. And one of my teachers years ago had said this in passing, and it stayed with me for even till date, is 60 to 70% of your lungs, the side and the back, go after that and stretch that and lengthen that. And it makes such a difference. While of course we stretch the front body too, but that point of go after the 360 model of, I think, is crucial. You mentioned belly breathing and child's pose, and gave me a beautiful segue into this next one. Can we talk about the nuances of belly breathing and diaphragmatic breathing? Is there a correlation here? Is there anything we should know about? I mean, I bet there's a lot, but...
Well, I would actually love to pick your brain on this one, because this is probably my biggest pet peeve. So belly breathing, I think everybody knows what belly breathing is. So meaning belly breathing, your chest is not moving. You're not getting very much any rib cage expansion, but you're getting this beautiful big Buddha belly expansion through the front. We know you're using your diaphragm. And we also know, because your chest isn't moving, you're not using your accessory muscles of breathing. So we kind of know what that is. But diaphragmatic breathing, people have all sorts of different ideas of what that is. And so we come to language. And most people would say diaphragmatic breathing, as we've kind of used it in layman's terms, really is belly breathing. It's a long, slow breath in. Diaphragmatic breathing isn't really something you'll see in the science, or it's not really a medical term. It doesn't have enough information. So you could loosely say you're using your diaphragm.
Understood.
But there are all sorts of ways you can use your diaphragm. Belly breathing, which is a beautiful tool to teach people not to use their accessory muscles of breathing, to bias airflow internal pressures, intra-abdominal pressure. Very wonderful tool for getting out of your sympathetic nervous system and getting a bit of parasympathetic vagal tone. Beautiful for that. But again, it's not optimal breathing. So optimal breathing integrates core and breathing.
Okay.
So belly breathing, there's no core. Your core is off. You're just blah, this beautiful, just massaging the organs. But you wouldn't want to like stand up and belly breathe because there's no support. You want to be rested, heavy. So diaphragmatic breathing then brings us into the whole world of, okay, is core integrated? Is it just the diaphragm? So there's not a lot of value in the term diaphragmatic breathing. We need more details.
Okay.
So, but I'm curious, in your world, what is the definition of diaphragmatic breathing for you in your experience?
So diaphragmatic breathing shows up in breath work in yoga, okay? Like the pranayama component of it. And we are usually, the way we've approached it in my trainings and understanding is we have, of course, the belly breathing, because we are also trying to get people away from upper chest breathing. What you're calling accessory muscles, we call it the upper chest breathing. And the goal is to go further down with your breath. Down and out. So one of the things that we aim for in breath work in yoga is to send the breath to the sides. If you picture the lungs and they're going out to the sidemost parts of your body. So belly breathing has its place in some seated breath work. We don't necessarily teach it in movement. In movement, it's kind of hard to belly breathe in poses. So naturally, if you're sitting and doing some things lying down, yes, then the breath is a little more belly breath. But when we're seated for breath work, belly breathing the goal is to bring them down towards, away from their top chest breathing. But diaphragmatic breathing has largely been taught as you take both hands and place it at the bottom of your rib cage. So not the squishy part of your trunk. And then when you breathe in, you're trying to let the hands pull apart because there is that sideward expansion. And then when you breathe out, the hands softly come back in, closer, back together. So we're trying to get the practitioner to breathe outward a little more. So that's been
that lateral.
Yes, the lateral movement.
Yeah.
And essentially to get away from accessory muscle breathing and top chest breathing, to get further down and out. But that particular version is taught more in seated. You're actually sitting for a session of breath work. In movement, it's not really called out as much.
Yes, that's where it really gets hard. So I would say if you are getting some lateral expansion, you have to be getting some core integration, which makes sense. You're sitting, you're getting that response against gravity. It is very, very difficult to get lateral expansion or posterior expansion without your abdominals on, because that is what creates the 360. Otherwise, you just get elevation and belly breathing. So again, this is where language, we're probably going to have very different schools having different conversations when we say diaphragmatic breathing, but it definitely sounds like the way you're using it, there is some core activation.
We talk about that a little more, because what are you defining as the core? Because in yoga, there are different ways people will approach the core. Some of my teachers have always said the core is everything from the shoulders to the hips and everything else in between. And some people will, you in your world, I know you are more precise and you have terminology for everything. You might have a different approach to what you call the core. So can we get into the core and breathing and get a little more understanding of how they lean or impact each other?
Favorite question. So they really are inseparable when we talk about optimal movement, optimal breathing, optimal core. In our world, and this would be where I do think all of the research is going, it's a pressure system. When you talk to the top researchers on stability, Paul Hodges, all of that, when you look at schools like Dynamic Neuromuscular Stabilization, Postural Restoration Institute, they all have the same idea of optimal, which is fabulous because for a long time, we didn't have the same idea. We didn't have the language of what is optimal. And schools might have different ways of getting to optimal, but at least we agree on what we're aiming for. And so the definition for core really is a cylinder, it's a canister, it's a barrel. It is a diaphragm. Well, the respiratory diaphragm is the lid. Your pelvic floor is the bottom, the floor, the pelvic diaphragm. And then every fascicle of every muscle around your abdominal wall and through the back. So that's fascia, that's abdominals, that's multifidus, transversus. You need all of it is the wall, and it is a pressure system. So when you breathe in, the diaphragm should be in a domed shape to start with. And that's where we get into trouble because our accessory muscles can take you out of the dome shape, and then you're just set up for failure. So you want to get that dome shape. And then when you breathe in, the diaphragm descends. It creates intra-abdominal pressure, 360 degrees around, and intrapelvic pressure, which is incredibly important. It's just the pressure system, down, out. And that is what stabilizes you, uprates you, and it's that regulation of tone. So then when you breathe in or out, it's going to elevate or ascend again, and then those muscles have to respond. So it's this constant response of regulating internal pressure with movement. So diaphragm is what starts all of it. Without the diaphragm, there is no internal pressure, no stabilization. And that's where we see tension strategies. People holding, there's abdominal gripping, back gripping, butt gripping, chest gripping. There's a lot of outside in stability, which is a system, but it's not an optimal system. We want from the inside out, we want balanced muscle forces, balancing internal pressures, and that's what we're aiming for. So
I'm going to ask you a question that is pretty common in the yoga world, at least, is when it comes to core and breathing. When you are breathing the way you described, right? Like that lid on top and creating that pressure system, do you actively draw the belly in? Because there are so many split schools of thought here, right? Do you engage the navel towards the spine? Do you not? Do you do that only in moments of like a stressful position for the body? What are your thoughts on that? When it comes to breathing, probably in movement is where I'm asking this.
So you do need that inward activation of muscle to balance out. And it's that summation of the inward force of all of the muscle around acting in, and then the outward force of the diaphragm coming down, pushing out. And it's that summation that creates stability. So if you don't have activation of, say, the abdominal wall, then there's no stability either. So the problem is in the balance. Are you just drawing in, but then you're not getting the breath low into that? You want the two together. You want to breathe low. So that's where, like we often say, start with the sandwich. You want this, ideally, you can even tie, a measure 360 degrees around, TheraBand, a belt, something. You want no holes and no ropes. We want balanced forces. So yes, go ahead and draw it in, but also draw your pelvic floor up, or you're going to blow the pressure at the bottom and create dysfunction down below. You want that whole, the floor, the rest of the cylinder working, and then breathe into it. If you aren't getting that breath low, creating that team, that coordination of breath and core, then you're doing a tension strategy. So drawing in without breathing into it, you're going to see abdominal gripping, probably back gripping.
Yes. And
get the breath low.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
okay.
If that makes sense.
What about, sometimes this is just a teaching tool, and then I'll move on from this point. Sometimes people say to teach that, they say cough and draw the belly in for some balance poses. Is that an effective strategy? I don't use it, but I've seen a couple of teachers using it. So
it is a way to find your abdominals. And so it is not a very sophisticated approach, but sometimes you need to start with something. And I don't want to throw out these things that it might not work for everybody, but
Fair.
you could see, does it help them find something? The thing we worry about is usually with a cough, it's a very strong upper abdominal connection. Pelvic floor blows out. Like people pee themselves when they cough. Then that's not good. That's not balancing the forces. And so you could say cough, but like try to engage your pelvic floor when you cough, or any of those strong breaths out. But again, that's more sophisticated. You might want to start with just cough. And then once they manage that, and it's like, well, you know what a Kegel is? Well, see if you can do a Kegel when you cough. Or so it wouldn't be my go-to just because I worry about more upper abdominal gripping, which then restricts the diaphragm. You don't get the lateral expansion.
No, I'm glad you clarified that. So can we talk about the pelvic floor? Because you mentioned it a few times, and I want to go there. I still want to do the spine and a few other things, but the pelvic floor, right?
Yes.
What I hear from you is there's a significant amount of significance for breathing and the strength or the condition of your pelvic floor. And a lot of people do not pay attention to their pelvic floor as much. And it's just something that I don't know why, it just doesn't exist as much. So how does pelvic floor influence or impact your breathing?
Yeah, so it is the bottom of the core is the problem. So if you want stability, which we all want, because then we don't have to go to massage and get needled and do as much of the relief work. If we actually have a good stabilizing system, that's efficient movement. You have to integrate. So pelvic floor and respiratory diaphragm, they need to feel each other. Your pelvic floor needs to know when you breathe in, just like the kidney area, the sandwich, all the way around. It's back to just pure physics. It is very, very simple. A cylinder with a piston on top, and the walls and the floor need to respond to the piston. It's that simple. And doesn't need to be perfect, but that's where it comes from. That's where a human infant spends 6 months coordinating, getting respiratory diaphragm integrated into core before they start to even sit or roll over and get into more vertical positions. And we just often need to go back to the beginning, stabilize, integrate, connect, and then rebuild those basic patterns. You need it. And it's definitely catching a lot of heat, pelvic floor, because it is not just women who have had babies. This is young people, and men, so many men. And it tends to be people who have a strong abdominal wall tend to blow out their pelvic floors and start to get, and usually what happens is there's a mix of it being disconnected. So you can think of prolapse and leaking, but then also gripping. So we get a lot of that gripping in the posterior pelvic floor. You can get it gripping in the front sometimes. And it's another reason why I love child's pose and bringing the air low is that area at the back of your hips, which, our piriformis and all of our hip rotators, our glutes come down. It's quite inseparable from pelvic floor. And that, like, breathing in that child's pose where you should be able to, if you put your hand there, you should be able to feel the expansion. You will feel it. Just like if we put our hand in your back body when you're in child's pose.
And you can even see that expansion. Yeah.
It's there. It is there. It's really neat. That is intrapelvic pressure. When you breathe in, your pelvic floor and that pelvic outlet is what we call it, respond to the pressure. It's this beautiful system. So you want to have awareness with your pelvic floor, which is the big thing. Most people, as you said, they don't think about it. They don't talk about it. You don't see it. So it's a disconnect, kind of like the back of the rib cage, big disconnect. And so bringing some awareness, which is, there's so many fabulous yoga poses where you can get into those experiences and awareness and feeling areas that we tend to lock down. Yes. So I don't know if that answered the question, but it is the floor of your core. So it needs to be working with your diaphragm. Your pelvic floor needs to know when you're breathing in and regulate that pressure. So if you're training breathing, and this is a great opportunity, I mean, one of my favorite things for breathing and pelvic floor is Uddiyana Bandha. So the bandhas, the Mula bandhas, the Uddiyana bandhas, so powerful for the nervous system response, as well as getting awareness into these areas that you just don't feel very often. It's really neat, some of those effects. So yeah, do something to kind of connect to your pelvic floor.
No, I'm glad you bring it up. And someday maybe we can do a full conversation about pelvic floor health, because it is just something that it has a stigma to it a little bit. And it's something a lot of people don't openly sit and talk about. And I think depending on, there are some cultural nuances to it, and it's not, it's mainstream in some parts, it's not visible in some parts. So I'd love to do a conversation someday about that. Couple of things. Does breathing change as you age?
So my take on this really is kind of the same answer for general mobility in the body. That
Understood.
if you feel you are stiff or uncomfortable, generally it has more to do with your lifestyle than how old you are. And we see that with people who practice yoga their entire life is probably the best cohort of people to look for those examples. You have a massive influence over the quality of your tissues, the health of your joints. Mechanotransduction, which is basically a force input creating a biological output. So quality of your tissues, that it doesn't have to, I don't think, at least not to the extent that people would see.
Understood.
What we need to do is go after staying dynamic and mobile, and that goes down to quality of stability and getting quality movement, volume of movement, variability of movement in our day. And that's very hard to do in this world. We tend to get very sagittalized. We lose rotation. We lose lateral, like frontal plane movement, which again, yoga ticks a lot of boxes. It gets people moving in those directions. So at least you're getting a dose of that in your day or your week. Yeah, I don't think it has to at all, but it's a lot of work. You have to be strategic and make sure you don't lose rib cage mobility, and think about quality of breathing and quality of stability.
The spine, how much of a role does the spine play for rib cage mobility and stability?
Oh, you have such a good question. These are details. So that is an interesting one. When I think spine, the first thing I think about is that is where the nerves come out to influence every muscle in your body. So when we will look at like breathing, so the phrenic nerve innervates the diaphragm, that's C3-4, which is in your neck. We know if you compress a segment, that can put pressure on the segmental nerve, and that increases tone. Facilitation is what happens. So you get an increase in tone of the fascicles of muscle that are innervated by that segment. So it can definitely interfere with the diaphragm's ability to fully relax and to contract properly when it has that constant, we call it like the volume. You want a muscle to be able to relax. It shouldn't be holding tension all the time. And when you compress the spine, you do get that irritation to the segmental nerve, and it's going to influence how that muscle regulates tone, that neural outflow to the muscle. Same thing, the other big area would be your abdominals. So abdominals are innervated by T6 to T12. So that lower half of your rib cage, that innervates your entire abdominal wall, transversus, EO, IO, rectus. You're going to see some not so good regulation of tone in your abdominal wall if you have compression and compromised spine health. And that's again why we need space. You want that back body expansion. You don't want that compression that we see so often. And that's where we see there'll be like an external oblique that's like a rope, or we'll see, poor activation of certain parts. So these ropes in these holes, and just want to balance it. So I often say every day should be spine day. Every day you should take care of your spine and doing a segmental cat-cow, something segmental. You have 17 segments from the base of your neck to the top of your pelvis, and then the 7 segments in your neck. And you want to make sure that each one it's like a link in a chain. Each one moves. As soon as you get a stiff one, then you tend to get overloading of the segments above and below it. So we want to make sure each segment is working together.
Mm-hmm.
So spine is influenced in that regard. So neural outflow and then just being able to activate the muscle. It also is going to change your ability to expand. So if you say have a Sherman's disease, which is when you get the wedge, like we see it in adolescents where they get the wedge shape. So they're very kyphotic, and it's going to be hard to get apical expansion. Now you're fighting against structure. Your potential goes down a little bit. Although we see phenomenal athletes who have scoliosis, severe scoliosis, and Sherman's. So it doesn't mean you can't be a phenomenal athlete, but your potential's going to go down just a touch. Osteoporotic wedge fractures in men and women, that'll change your ability to expand. And again, that internal pressure airflow management will be just a little harder to get it 360 degrees. So it does influence it. Every day should be spine day. Just a few moments and just, do something to like bring that awareness, make sure you can control and get mobility in through each segment, not just boom, boom, cat, cow, or whatever you're doing. If it's a roll down, it is meant to move.
Understood.
Segments.
No, that's wonderful, because at the studio, we often say you're only as young as your spine is.
I like it. Yes.
And it's a thing that we've said for so long that has become almost a joke in our classes, because when we get to the spine, they're like, we know we're only as young as your spine is. And we talk about reverse aging the spine, and they see it over time, what that movement does. So to wrap things up, do you have any favorite breath practices that you want the listeners to take away?
Okay. So I'm quite passionate, and that if I was going to do one thing with anybody, and this is somebody who's sprained their ankle, somebody who has back pain, someone who has shoulder impingement, you have to work on your exhale. So the exhale is when your diaphragm is domed. Nothing works. Core doesn't work. Ribcage doesn't expand. Nothing works if you can't start with a diaphragm that is domed. And one of the things we say in PRI, one of my schools, is our goal is a breath in at the point of full exhalation. Full, complete exhale. And almost everybody out there is exhalation restricted. That's what osteopaths call it, that inspiratory position that we started our conversation with. You have to learn how to exhale. So, it can start with just lengthening the exhale, which we do a lot. That's a beautiful place to start, is just, breath into a count of 4, breath out to a count of 8. But the real power comes into going into that full, complete exhale, where you are emptying all of yesterday's air out, because then it is delicious. That breath in is so gorgeous when you're at the point of full exhalation. It's effortless. You get this massive amount of intra-abdominal pressure, gorgeous expansion into areas that you don't usually feel. So that full, complete breath out. And I would say that adding a pause at the end of the exhale. And that is, we say the power is in the pause. That is when you get friction, frustration. It is not a comfortable place to be. Yes. But that is when you get neurological change. That's how neuroplasticity works. That's how we get biological changes. We need that intensity. You will not change if you're not willing to be a little bit uncomfortable. So extending the exhale, possibly a full, complete exhale, possibly a pause at the end of the exhale. The only thing I would say is how you exhale matters. So if you exhale and your lower belly pooches, that's not very good. If you exhale and your pelvic floor pooches, that's not very good. If you exhale and your cheeks pooch, that's not managing internal pressure. So do try when you exhale, just like with your cough, try to get the whole core working. So pelvic floor, ascends. So you can think of any of the cues, that gathering and lifting, or whichever you want for pelvic floor. You want to think about a zipper all the way up. Beautiful to add in adductors. That's why we often have a ball between the knees squeezing. Hamstrings are actually kind of accessory muscles of breathing. You can't breathe out if the pelvis isn't positioned. So that makes the experience of the breath out much more pleasant and just effortless, because we want it to be effortless, not just abdominal gripping, which is why you will often see people in that 90-90 at the wall, feet on the wall, ball between the knees, a little bit of a hamstring drag, breathing out. Full complete exhale with the pelvic floor connection. So it's kind of layering on techniques. Extend the exhale, maybe a full complete exhale, then add a pause. And then if you really want a gold star, get down on the ground, get your feet on a wall, use your hamstrings and your adductors, and get the whole global pattern working, because it is supposed to be a bit of a global event. The exhale.
No, that's wonderful. And that's, as you're saying it, those images are forming, and we've done these in yoga practice a little bit ourselves. So it really connects the dots. Thank you so much for being here. Can you tell the listeners where they can connect with you, where they can find you online?
Yes. So generally, I post all my goodies on Instagram. It's Movement 101, so MVMT.101. And I do love sharing information. I love answering questions and brainstorming. I learn so much from people out there in the world and share things there. And then I do have a website, movement101.ca. And it has a few free classes if you want to get beyond the 90-second Instagram snippets. So free classes on core and breathing, free classes on hip mobility, shoulder mobility, feet, all of those things. I have a pelvic floor class. Everybody should be carving out time for awareness of pelvic floor. And then I do have a school where I teach all around the world, wonderful people, lots of yoga instructors, Pilates instructors, people who are movement enthusiasts and want the more sophisticated approaches to, or more, something. I call my approach sophisticated, but I think we steal everything from yoga anyway. So, but you can find lots of resources there too. So, yeah.
Wonderful. I will make sure to link everything in the show notes at letstalk.yoga. Thank you so much for being here, Michelle. This is wonderful. I know it's a massive topic that we got into, but thank you for layering it. And we hope to have you back on the show.
Oh, such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon. Take care.
Thank you for listening. I hope you are on my monthly mailing list. If not, the link is below. I will see you next week with another conversation. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.